Allow me to introduce you to ADAMA.
Atlanta is the Black Mecca. We know this already. We are home to people of African descent and the epicenter of arts and culture.
But where can you go to experience Black art and culture, illuminating the depth and breadth of the African diaspora?
Launched in March 2020 as a museum without walls, ADAMA quickly emerged as a space that is already engaged in communities around the world.
The best part about being a founding member of ADAMA
is knowing that I'm part of making history.
By contributing to ADAMA, you're joining a global community of dreamers and builders,
bringing forth a world-class museum
that highlights the Black global experience.
And it's all happening here.
Right here.
Right here.
Right here, right now.
Right here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Join us.
Give.
And get involved.
ADAMA.
Hey everyone. I was reading Bell Hooks just to get prepared, but I'm glad to have you here. Today we're going to be speaking with Gabrielle Hickmon and Shefon Taylor, and I'm going to be reading their bios just to give you a quick information about both of them. Gabrielle Ione Hickmon, she's interested in body memory, waiting rooms, layovers, circles, Black imaginaries, and ocular proof. Her work includes essays, ethnographical research, and coil-built ceramics. Her writing has appeared in Condé Nast Traveler, The Baffler, The Pudding, Literary Hub, and elsewhere. Gabrielle is currently at work on the Boyne City Project, a series of vessels chronicling her family history in Michigan, which dates back to before the Great Migration, an essay collection, and a memoir. Thank you for being here, Gabrielle. And Shefon and Taylor, an interdisciplinary artist interrogating themes of rememory, interiority, and the exceptional found in the Black vernacular. Our choice of collage as medium is a fascination with its impulse, delicacy, and compromise. It functions as an aesthetic engagement and an archival effort to amplify the ordinariness of Black life through vernacular photography. As a guide, Shefon points to Toni Morrison's concept of rememory as recollecting and remembering, and as in reassembling the members of the body, the family, the population of the past. The artist connects to the history of the found objects and archival photographs and engages their willingness to become a new thing. The combination of the texture of memory and the relics of yesterday serves as a way to encounter the past, present, and future. Shefon cites such artists as Toni Morrison, Carrie Mae Weems, and Lorna Simpson as influences on her work. Thank you both for being here. I think in a very selfish way, I've just wanted to talk with you both. And I think that both of just your work and the way that you all think about art as Black women, and just being in the archive in the way that we all know the archive as artists is particularly not something that is, I guess, solo or something that's done. I think it's a through line in the work that Black women artists particularly work with the archive in a way that is either they make it known or they're just doing it privately in their practice to influence their work. And so, I just wanted to have that conversation with you all today, or it's been many months since we've been trying to meet here. So I guess we can go into that particular part of it as far as like the inspiration and who you currently are citing in your work. I know, Shefon, you speak about obsession and how Toni Morrison also speaks about obsession and going after those obsessions. What are you currently going after in your work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one, thank you for bringing both Gabrielle and us together. I'm really excited to chat today. But I would say that when I think about Toni Morrison's work in her recent exhibit in Princeton exposed this of her obsessions. And so her ability to, look at an article, that clip of, Margaret Garner, and, build that into what became Beloved, was a very, clear display of her ability to just really obsess over a thing, and be able to expand it into something that could become her work. And I think that feels so resonant in the work that I do. My work was really born from a Polaroid that I found in my great uncle's archive. And it was a photograph of my grandmother and her youngest sister. In that image, I was so concerned with, their lives and who they were at that particular moment. They were 20-something-year-olds. And, I only knew my grandmother as this, older, Holy Ghost filled, sanctified woman. And I was really curious about what her life was at that moment. And that has really allowed me to use memory as a guide to dreaming, and to really be able to interrogate what I want certain aspects of my life to be, whether it's femininity or womanhood or motherhood or artist. And so being able to, what Toni Morrison refers to as being able to use their interior life as some entryway into my own, I think was the real catalyst for obsession, in my work. I was very much obsessed with that photograph. And it's informed my practice very, deeply about not only how I am attempting to imagine my life, but to really get to wander around and, the richness of what, the interior lives of my grandmother and her sisters were.
I love that. Well, I've always loved that. I think the slowness of sitting with photographs in a way that we don't necessarily do now is a practice that is appreciated, because you're just on burst mode with either your phone or a digital camera, and you just maybe pick one photograph out of it, but you don't necessarily sit with it.
For sure.
And you don't necessarily sit with those people that were in that moment. What happened, or what that particular moment was, but just to kind of excavate every single second that photograph made still, is something that I'm also obsessed with, as you can see.
Yeah, and I know, we were able to talk about Tina Camp, some years ago, and her concept of being able to listen to images, and thinking of them as haptic objects. And it's not just an ocular encounter, right? You go to an image and you're bringing so many things to it. And you're thinking about, what's happening, on the periphery of, the photograph that you're looking at. And I think that is a really, really good just descriptor of how my work, has unfolded over the last couple of years.
And for you, Gabrielle, is that the same as far as working with images or a particular story? I know you're more on the writing side, so what particularly inspired the Boyne City Project for you there?
Yeah, the Boyne City Project emanates from, I think, an obsession with my paternal family line. My middle name, Ione, is my dad's mom's name, my grandmother's name, but she passed away when he was a child. So I never got to meet her. And so throughout my life, I've sort of sat with this question and the weight of well, what does it mean to be named after or have the name of someone that you never actually got to experience in the physical realm? And so I've sort of been obsessed with her, right? Trying to understand who she was in her life, and do I look like her? Are there similarities that we have, right? And I go and I visit, great aunts and other family members who actually, were able to experience her in the physical realm, and I bombard them with these questions. But then the Boyne City Project sort of starts, right, I think, with her, and then emanates out to this general kind of question and obsession with my paternal family. And I don't know if this was true for y'all, but I feel there's always maybe one side of the family that you spend more time with. And so for me growing up, that was absolutely my mom's side. And so I have sort of less questions there because I just innately have more information. And so the Boyne City Project is trying to answer questions that I have or fill in gaps and just sort of attend to this part of myself that I don't inherently have as much information about. And it's also about like tending to, the relationship with the land that I find myself on, like here in Michigan, and that my family has inhabited, since the Great Migration, like literally since the 1870s. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And how does that influence how I think about myself, influence how I think about Blackness, influence just what it means to be from this place, and then how that shows up in my work and all of the ways that I also live my life.
I think that the like liminal space of unknowing, and the questions that come up from that, like you want to follow and like can't like not continue following until you find the answer, or until you don't find the answer. It's like, how long am I going to keep going after this question? And then I guess there's also like that part of asking the question but continuing the making in between too, because like you can get stuck in the question asking stage of things. So I think in that question asking stage, and introducing the archive in your processes, how has that changed the way you think of preservation of your family's history, like in between of it all?
Yeah, it's really sort of interesting and beautiful and challenging and a privilege to, I think, have such rich family histories that we're aware of to pull from. Like everyone sort of can't say that, or everyone doesn't have that information available to them. And I think a lot about M. Norby Phillips' concept of body memory, and also epigenetics, and just this idea that like, our ancestors literally live within our bodies. And so they're, with us in every single thing that we're doing. And so I don't always have to like try to answer the question, right? I can just like kind of sit and be with them, or let them come to the fore, and then see and like do my best to translate what it is that they're sending through.
I think when I think about preservation, I do not consider myself, an archivist in the way that you are, Sierra, but I don't know if I do like an absolutely like wonderful job at the idea of like preserving family history, like as an archivist. And I've been thinking about that a lot, especially after, seeing my uncle's archive, and he was so intentional about labeling these photographs and the dates, and he was going on trips and like keeping account of how much things cost. And there were so many like wonderful things that were happening in that, and he wouldn't call it an archive, right? But I'm calling it an archive with that, of photographs, that he has. And I was really blown away at, one, the intentionality, but just, the very, the way it all felt very poetic, and this really unconscious, need to document the people who he was around. And now that like, I discovered that photograph about 6 years ago, went back this summer and had a totally different, encounter with it as an artist. And was like, wow, okay, I'm not doing a great job at preserving what's happening present day, as an artist, as a family member, all of it. And I'm like, how can I look at this and be better at how I'm making sure that, my family and, their history and all the ordinariness of it all is really suited to live beyond this moment. And I don't know if I have, an answer. But I do know that, like, after, that recent encounter and thinking about the way that, I think my work currently focuses so much on what was preserved, I'm like, okay, yeah, what is my role in making sure, that things are held together for a future?
I think so much of it.
Sorry. Go ahead, Gabrielle.
I was gonna say, I think so much of it too, like, is sort of about tools, and even what you were saying earlier in this conversation, Sierra, about, like slowness, right? Like, our previous generations were probably taking photos with analog technology, right? And then they're physically getting pictures back, and we're taking them, on our iPhones, and like, you could organize them right in a digital something, but part of that for me has also been about shifting back to, or like, some analog technologies, right? Like taking actual film pictures and going and picking up my negatives and keeping them and writing down, like, on the packet that they give you, right, that the photos come in, like, where was I and when was this and who was I with when right? And like being sort of intentional about having a way to document moments that is not reliant on like the cloud or these digital tools that are great, but like I feel like in some ways inherently make doing some of that work harder. And then I think, it's also about like just asserting the fact that, ordinary everyday Black Lives Matter and like get to be celebrated too, which I think, Shefon, your work does so beautifully. So that's another thing that I think about too. It's like, well, what tools are we actually using to do the documentation? And is there a way in which those are making it potentially harder for us to, right, be good record keepers and good stewards of, the present moment?
Yeah, I thought about that yesterday because I was at my mom's birthday party and I didn't bring out my my large like DSLR. I just had a Polaroid with me, like walking around the room and like taking smaller pictures of people, and kind of having like the Sharpie on the side and noting who it was. And it also kind of made me kind of slow down with like the composition of things and not like bursting how they were doing over in the photo booth. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. As far as like knowing the tool that you're working with helps with that. Um, and I think also what you were kind of going into, um, Shefon, was about like whether your role kind of is the actual archivist or how that works inside of your family kind of node. And the question that I had around that was, does your family have an archivist or historian, or because you work so closely with these primary sources, have you assumed that role?
Yeah. They think it's me, and I'm okay with that. People have albums and things, and because of the work that they know that I do, they bring it to me, and I love that. Right, I really do love, in a way, being like a keeper of that history. Right, I love it, and I love my family for recognizing, even if they really don't know what I'm doing all the time. They're like, we need to give her these photos, and I'm like, yeah, we should do that. And so I think in part by doing the work, I do feel some responsibility to it, and I haven't quite figured out, like I said, what it looks like, but I think I do. And I think because I do have I do, place a really significant value on it. I'm like, okay, how do I do this in a way that is, I think, one, to Gabrielle's point, use tools in a way that allows for it all to slow down, but also to do it in a way that moves us away from how I think we currently document things, which is to show the internet, right?
Mhm.
And that's not always particularly for lack of a better word, like an authentic moment, right? Those are really curated moments. And when I think about the images that I look at to build my work, they're the complete antithesis of that, right? They're not that at all. It's not about a gaze. And so I think about that a lot too. And again, a lot of thinking and asking questions, but not coming up with with many answers. But I do like to think that, like, we just had our family reunion, and I love the idea of being able to talk to the folk who were there, of like my grandmother and her original 15 siblings, and there are only 4 of them left, and being able to really take into account like who's here and like who are you with and like all of that. And so I do think that I've very much been kind of like nudged and encouraged into the role in a way that I'm not mad at. I'm not mad at all, actually.
Is that the same for you, Gabrielle? Or do you have a family archivist or historian?
I think there are a few people who have taken on that mantle, but sort of in different ways. And I have a similar experience to Shefon where people know, oh, well, Gabrielle's making work about this, or she's looking at that. And so they'll send me things. Like my great aunt found my grandmother's wedding album and was like, oh, I have like mailed it to me, or she'll mail me, pictures that she's finding in her chest of drawers or newspaper headlines, things like that. And they inform they become like the scaffolding on which the project rests, on which the research emanates from. And I'm beginning to integrate some of the photographs into those ceramics. But then, I also have family members who have done what I feel like is a very like Black family thing, where they've made this family history book almost. Like they've done all the research and they have the family trees and they've done the DNA testing and all these different things and like compiled it into this book that they put, that they gave to everyone. And I think of that as, another form of archiving our stories. And so a lot of the visual work and language that I'm building around my family history like starts from and emanates from that place. And then now people are like, oh, well, Gabrielle's attending to this, so we will give her and send her all of the things as well. So it's a role that I occupy as an artist, but there are also other family members who are doing that work and attending to those stories as well.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, specifically also because my work deals with my family history as well, but also just inviting other people and inviting other family members who are also interested in the history in that way to work alongside, because like you can't do it alone. It's not a process that you can do alone. And then also not like expecting the Black woman artist to be the archivist, like allowing the Black woman artist to be the artist and our archivist come sit with them and say this and this and this. But unfortunately, I know most of us either assume that role or you're the only one interested in the history in that way. So I was just wondering about that and have been kind of that kind of leads into I guess memory work in a way that I've been interested in, that like we spend so much time working with other people's memories, and how that like influences the work, and how the work is made from other people's memories, rather than like our own. And so is there a place in your practice where you're working with your own memories, and how's the differing there?
That's a really interesting question, because I think up front I feel differently from you, that I'm working with other people's memories. Like on the one hand, I think, yes, that is sort of inherently and innately true, but I also think that, if I believe that my ancestors live within my body, then their memories become mine as well, because we're inhabiting, the same space. But I do think that, particularly if I'm sort of writing maybe purely from a personal experience, which again, I don't know if that ever is the case, right? Because we carry everyone who came before us with us all the time. So it's kind of like, are we ever really alone, or is anything ever sort of just ours? But I think the place where it feels sort of the most resonant, that I'm working with something that is inherently mine, or just mine in a different way, is when I'm writing or making work about my experience with breast cancer. But even that, right, isn't fully mine, because I have, other ancestors who also had breast cancer or illness, or other different things. So it's a really interesting question, and I'm not sure that I feel like there is a difference between memories that are mine and memories that are theirs.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think part of that answer resonates with me, and I think the thing that I'll say that I was thinking about during my time in residency is that memory, as we try to remember someone else's life, is inherently unreliable, right? It can be really vague and ambiguous, and I
Even
think
remembering our own lives is unreliable. Like memory in general, unreliable.
Right? Yeah, like completely elusive, right? And so I think that what happened for me is I was at a moment in my life where I was nearing 30. I came across this photograph. My grandmother was 27. I'm like, was she having the same experience that I'm having right now? Like everything that I am feeling, what was that happening for her? Right. And I think because we tend to look at the archive with a particular reverence, we tend to look at our elders with a particular reverence. I don't think we do a good job at humanizing them all the time. And I think what happened for me in that process was that moving through my own mess at the moment, my own memories at the moment, my own experiences at the moment, really allowed me to fully think through what it meant to look at my my grandmother and her sisters as human, right? And I think that happened as a result of me being able to accept my very much humanness in that particular moment. And so, again, that feels like duh on surface, right? But that's not what happened for me. As a result, I'm like, okay, whatever I was thinking about my grandmother and her sisters and her marriage and my family is probably completely inaccurate, right? It's probably it's probably not reliable at all. And so I think what happened, what I wanted to do was then to say, okay, when I'm thinking through this work, how am I able to reimagine them as human, as a way to acknowledge my own human experience? And so I think that if I had to think about my own personal experience and memory through the work, that is how I would probably frame it.
I appreciate both of the answers. I think for yours, Gabrielle, it's just a reminder that again, we're not alone, and how time works, how we think about time in a non linear way, and it being very cyclical.
Time is fake. It's literally up, and it's so interesting to look into African ways of thinking about time, or indigenous ways of thinking about time, and how they're totally different to sort of these Western European notions of time that we're sort of always saddled with and thinking about, and trying to really free my practice and my body from white supremacy, right? This is not a space where I want that ideology or way of being to show up at all. I mean, there are so many times when I'm like in the ceramic studio and I'm just talking to my ancestors, or I'm hearing them, you know, oh, like take this out or bring this in, or okay, you can stop now, right? Like, and that being the sort of internal guidepost or thing that I'm like listening to and communing with as I'm making work. Like they're not outside, like they're not outside of me, right? Like they are inside of me and they are also me.
For sure. I love that. There's a really wonderful podcast conversation that happened between Dewey Crumpler and Saidiya Hartman. I think about it all the time. And Dewey Crumpler talks about this idea of, you know, ancestors talking into the universe, right? Or even just their living, being like, you know, this wave that hits a certain resistance and it's echoed back. And because it's collapse of time, what happens is that it echoes back to us. And I really love that idea. And he talks about, you know, he and Saidiya being kind of, you know, tuned and cauldronized and shaped in a way to capture those voices and those sounds, and that meaning to be able to bring their voices like into alignment, right? To be able to recapture their voice for a present moment. And I think about that all the time because I'm like, you know, one, what a visual, first of all. But what a wonderful way to think about, you know, the ways in which we are in conversation, in negotiation with ancestors all the time. And I love that. I really do. I really do. And so completely agree to Gabrielle's point.
And I guess since we're on the topic of time, what time were you giving back to yourself? And mostly when I speak to that is I really place emphasis on the residency experience with Black women artists and helping them understand that either investing in a residency or investing time in a residency is just integral to the work. And I can explain it, but once you like actually go and do it, you really appreciate that time that you spent there, not only with the work, but the time that you have given back to yourself. So I know both of you have just come out of some resident experiences. So what time are you, I guess, looking forward to giving back to yourself now?
I spent a year in residency with the Delaware Contemporary Museum here in Wilmington, Delaware, and had access to studio space 24 hours a day. I had a mentor and all the resources of the museum. And I spent a year like super deep in my work. And one, it was really wonderful to have that kind of space and time to really think through these complex thoughts and ideas that I wanted to have. But I came out of it feeling so exhausted, but in a good way, right? And I was like, oh man, like I want to get back to work because I had this huge breakthrough. But I was like, I'm tired. And so I spent this summer like enjoying my summer, and I felt really guilty about it. But I think that after that residency, even though like I really wanted to like continue to like full steam ahead from what I had done over the last year, I was like, okay, you really have to, kind of take a step back, reflect on everything that has happened. Think about, what you've been able to learn, the work that you've been able to do, and, how you want to expand, this breakthrough, moving forward. Because, as fake as time is, I still can never seem to find enough of it for myself. And so I think that was, really important for me to do post-residency, like with my son being out of school and, all of that. And so I just really enjoyed my summer. And so I think the fall has really been a moment for me to kind of connect back to the work that I'm doing and think about the intentionality of the residency that I did with the museum. And that was really the bar. And so I'm worried that I won't find another experience like that again. But Yeah, I think for me, being able to, take a step back and reset and think about the work that, I had done over the last year, post residency was really, really, really important.
Yeah, I being in residency for a year is a dream. I'm manifesting that for myself at some point. But I think when I think about like time that I'm giving back to myself, I try to be very intentional about taking a sabbatical every year. This is my second year doing one. So the first year I took a month. This year I took 2 months, and some of that has been a way to do residencies. But some of it is also just asserting the fact that like I will rest, and rest is important, and knowing that no one else is going to carve out that time for me to do so other than me.
Yes.
Not in this Black female body, right? Like no one else is going to take care of me. No one else is going to ensure that I have the things that I need. No one else is going to ensure that I have the space that I need to just be but me. And so sabbatical has been a very intentional way of building time into my life each year to sort of have nothing else to do except for what Gabrielle wants to do, which has been very revolutionary and restorative. In terms of residencies, for me, I'm in this current moment, right? I'm balancing, a day job with my creative practice. And so sometimes it feels like I'm only able to write or go to the studio in these sort of stolen moments, or just write. It requires just a real level of intentionality and commitment to the work to say, no, I will not be in a meeting with you right now. I'm going over here to write, or I'm going over here to read, or I'm going over here to, spend some time with Clay. And so residencies are this nice moment where I don't have to do that, right? I can just fully be with myself or fully be with whichever piece of my practice I'm engaging in at the time, and they always lead to either new methods or new ideas or a deepening of questions and inquiries and explorations that were already present. And they're almost like a quantum leap or something. I feel like, it puts me on this other timeline, or it puts me in this other place where I'm able to just be present in a very different way with the work and with myself.
Yeah. Before we started, I was reading or rereading "Women Artists: The Creative Process" by Bell Hooks, and one thing she does speak on at that time when she wrote it was that women artists are still struggling with finding that time, and I feel like with reading a lot of Black women artists' processes or their daily their daily routines and things that they go about. We're just always looking for like pockets of time to do the work in. And I think that will always remain a struggle until like something like collapses. That's something mean capitalism. And so
Yes.
Well, the other thing that I'll say is that I think that because, being in residency and, like there are timelines and like I had to be in my studio, it was really an opportunity for me to talk to my family and the rest of the community around me about what I was doing. And, so I have a, almost 16-year-old, and it was an opportunity for me to talk through what it meant to deepen his capacity, deepen his father's capacity. And so I think that it was also an opportunity to say, okay, what can I take my hands off of? And being honest about that and not feeling like I needed to have my hand on it because I'm, the mom or, the daughter or, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
I think presenting to others the severity of the work that I was doing, right? Because my art is very curious to me. And so being able to sit in front of others and say, hey, like I have this going on, I need to be here, I need to do this, I need some help, right?
Yeah.
Which was hard to do. That was also the way that I was able to find time, in my studio practice, but just to be like, look, I need to lay down this weekend, or whatever it might be. And so and not feeling guilty about not being omnipresent, for everyone, all the time. And so I think that was another thing that was very real for me during my time. If I wanted to take my practice seriously, I had to lean on the community around me, to get the work done.
Yeah, like creating the time for yourself, creating the boundary around whatever it is. Like for the last year, not this year, but in 2022, Sundays were my studio day. I'm in church and then I'm at the studio. Don't ask me to be nowhere else. Don't ask me to do nothing else. You know where I'm going to be. Don't call me. Don't text. Right. And really asserting to people the importance of the time and the space, and that being as, or if not important as any other commitment that you have, with yourself or with anyone else. And people don't get it because they're like, if you're not an artist, you don't understand all of the time that it takes, and how so much of the practice is just showing up to the studio or showing up to the page. But there's so much work, right, involved in getting yourself there, all of these rituals that you have, or these ways of being that you have with yourself and with your practice, that have to be prioritized in order to show up well. Like, I need to keep a regular sleep schedule so that the channel can be clear, or I need to do morning pages, or whatever these other ways are that you take care of yourself and keep your channel open, asserting to folks and to yourself, right, that this is important, I will show up for it. And if we're going to be in community or in relationship, then you have to understand that this is important and that I'm going to show up for it. And so if that means that I can't show up for you sometimes, then we have to figure that out. And that's a hard, when people are used to you always being available or being at their beck and call, that's a hard adjustment, but it's one that's necessary in order to give the work the attention that it deserves, because it really is severe. If I'm not touching, there's only so long that I can go without touching clay before I really get out of balance, right? Just me, it's essential to who I am. And I think, you have to understand that about yourself, and then figure out how to prioritize it as best as you can in your life, with the knowledge that, life is always happening, but what are you going to be intentional about?
Yeah. And spoiler alert, everyone will be okay.
Yes. The world, it'll keep spinning. It's actually fine.
And I think just the foundation of what we're all here for, as far as our lineage and our family and our history, and that severity of not only preserving the history, but interrogating the history in a way that it helps, activate the archive in a way that either our family comes back into that story and comes back into helping preserve that story, but also helps others see outside of our family that that history in this way is important as well, and understanding the foundation of where that came from can lead to more than what we have. I think that striving towards that more, and striving towards that something after us is in it being rooted in history, it's just something special that you kind of can't explain until someone else experiences it. Like they find a photograph that they're like obsessed with, or an article that they're like obsessed with, and they kind of dig into that and really realize like, oh, this is what Shefon was doing. This is what Gabrielle was doing in her work, and I think that you both being examples of that um, is something invaluable. The last question I kind of had. Um, we spoke to the relationship about to your ancestors a bit, but I guess in calling them into your work, is it a continual call, or is there like a ritual that happens inside of the work in that way? Um, and when I guess uh, and we probably kind of answered to it. I feel like Gabrielle's answer may be that it's like in a continuum that kind of happens, that they're always with you. But then I feel like there's also that those times where you're like, can you like give me an answer, or can you come sit with me and like I
Yeah.
don't have this information. Like, I guess, do you have an example of both of those inside of your work that you
Yeah,
can
I
kind of?
mean, it definitely is continual, right? Because like I've reiterated, I do believe that they're always with me, but I have an altar for them with photos and the five elements, and I bring them flowers or food, right? Like offerings. But I also do a lot of sort of somatic check-ins. So I'll ask myself a question and then wait to feel the answer somewhere in my body. And I think that that's another way that um, if I need sort of specific information, that I call upon them to offer that to me.
I love that. I would say I think about the way Claudette Johnson talks about her work, with ancestry and spectral figures, and this idea of negotiating her relationship with her ancestors. And I really love that. I think as a thought in terms of like how I move through my work, and it's like, yeah, it's about who I'm calling and when, but really like what for.
Mm,
And I think that always, is the harder thing to examine in the work, right? Who was in front of you, and for what reason? Because I think that that relationship
mm,
is two-way, right? It's not just about um, me calling them forth, right? I think that when I talk about obsession and being possessed by a thing, it's also being about me being called by the thing. And so I love that negotiation in terms of like, why am I in this photo album, right? Why am I here? What am I doing? What am I looking at? What is it that you want me to see, right? And I think that particular negotiation and frustration happened a lot in my residency, where I'm like, what am I doing in this book, right? Because it is a lovely thing to encounter, but sometimes you're like, okay, like, what is the reason that I am here? What is the question I'm asking? What am I trying to understand about myself? What am I trying to understand about you? Like, what is really needing to be revealed to me about the thing? And so very much, I think, resonate with Gabrielle's point, but also, this idea of just being able to like negotiate that thing. Like, you're here and I'm here. Like, what's up? Like, what are we doing? And so I think that that is probably the way that the idea of ancestry shows up, probably in my practices. I'm calling a thing back and forth.
we have a question about how are you working on passing this practice along so the work continues. Um, so is it? I guess that's talking about building your own archive, or just solidifying a process to say like, this is how I did it. This is like step by step of if you wanted to replicate it, then this is what I did. Are y'all working on that, or do you intend on working on it? Or I've also been thinking about and not to negate the question, but I've also been thinking about just like the sacredness of forgetting. Like, are you an artist that would rather their like practice be forgotten in that way? And would you want people to respect that, so that like if your work did continue, but you don't allow people into your process in that way?
Yeah, I can tell you some things about the process after it's over. I think there's something sacred about the process. And I've been reading this book, The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Molly Doma Patrice Somé. And in it, he talks about just like an indigenous African perspective on art. And at one point he says in the book, that artists in his village are not observed, right, while they're at work. And I think about that a lot in this world where I think we have to negotiate and navigate so much in trying to have a practice, share the practice, and share the work. And I think a lot of that often, kind of inherently or in some ways falls to the internet and to social media. And what are you, sharing, and make the GIFs and the reels and dance for whatever. And right, to be able to assert like I'm not doing that, and I might not ever do that. And the work is the offering, and how I came to the work is probably none of your business, is something that I think about and that resonates a lot with me. But there are other ways in which I'm fully prepared to sort of be a teacher, right? So I can teach you how to coil-build a vessel, and then you can figure out what your practice is about. Or I can teach you how to write an artist bio, or go or do a residency, right? And then you can have the space to figure out your own work, but not sort of inherently giving away the sacred pieces of mine, but like always being willing to share tools or information that will help someone else figure out theirs.
Yeah, it's funny. I like as Gabrielle started to speak, I'm like, yeah, absolutely no. Like, I know how she's going to respond. I think that because I have come to this work in an informal way, like by way of not being formally educated, I think that I have learned a great deal from artists and makers and thinkers who are actively sharing the way that they arrive to a particular thing. And I think that that has become such a huge part of my practice because of the way that I have entered this work as an artist, right? And so I think that I would preface it with that. That I'm only able to navigate my practice by studying the practice of other artists and thinkers, right? But I do think that the work of creativity is deeply personal, it's deeply intimate. And so I think, being able to talk about, art and art making in a way that focuses on process and practice, and not so much of what might be happening, all the time with me, maternally, I think works. And I think that everyone has to make art that it exists as some refraction, right? Some study of the way that, like, light passes and bends through you. Reality is that, whatever work that you make, it has to be through your own self-excavation, right? The same thing for me. But I would say that I'm probably more prompted to share like studio notes, a lot of, my process and practice, because I think I believe in, the magic and mystery of art, but I also believe in, demystifying what it means to be creative, right? um, because I do think it's really, really important for Black women in particular to be able to access their creativity in a way that, even if it doesn't lend them to being artists with a capital A, that they are allowed to do that kind of self excavation and exploration in a way that they feel freed up from it, right? Because that's ultimately what happens when you do the work, right? You're freed up.
Yeah.
And so I would say that I do enjoy talking about like the language of creativity and how we might move through a practice and what it means, to kind of demystify practice and process. Only because I have been able to, listen to a number of artists and makers as an entry into my own work, for sure.
I feel like that's a good note to end on. But did you all have any questions for each other?
That's a good question.
Questions for each other. Love that. I want to just say too about my answer to the previous question that I'm a Scorpio rising, and so that's really like I just want to. That's really where a lot of that comes from as well. Like it's yeah. I just needed to throw that out there.
So that's really interesting. So that would have been a fun question to ask. I'm a Scorpio rising too. And so I love that as a fun fact. We'll have to figure out, then how are you and I'm me? We'll have to figure that out.
Yeah. I think a lot about like just like breadcrumbs, like you can follow this if you're paying attention, but I'm not gonna just give it all away. But I do also learn a lot from hearing other people talk about their practice and process, and or how are you building this, right? And watching what you're doing with your hands and things like that. So it's an interesting thing to navigate. I feel like it just has to feel energetically aligned for me, but it's big Scorpio energy.
And I think that's real. And I think if I think about, art as an industry, right, overall, and how you, make way, it's like, I really think about this idea that if there were so many others who were not willing to share that practice, but that means that I don't get to, move toward, a career as an artist, because of a number of, life experiences I have been the case. And so, I also love the idea of being able to, like, if you got it, you got it. You know what I mean? And so I love that idea of like, if you have the tools, you can absolutely, you can make it. And so I think I do love the idea of sharing in a way that doesn't need to reveal all of who I am, but can certainly reveal the ways that creativity has, saved my life in a lot of ways, for sure.
There's a question. Can each of you briefly talk about some creative projects you're working on in detail? I guess you all, and to kind of side quest that, do you all have like any smaller projects other than Boyne City and like the work that you made at the museum and in your residency?
Well, I think, I'm just, knee deep in expanding the body work that I was able to build out in residency. It was my first time doing figurative work, and it was a huge departure from the work that I was making before. And so a lot of what, I'm doing right now is just focusing on, how to build out that visual language that feels, especially for me. And so I think that is the work that is due for me this season, for sure.
Yeah, I am I'm working on a memoir. about my experience with breast cancer. So I'm doing a lot of writing and research and scaffolding for that. And then sort of always thinking about and working on the Boyne City Project, but also have been sort of very intense with clay for the last maybe year or so, right? Trying to begin that project, trying to build a portfolio, trying to figure out style, which I think you're always figuring out. And so right now I'm kind of just looking forward to playing and making things and exploring form with clay and sort of seeing where it goes, but not tying it to any one specific project, but just making some vessels and seeing what resonates and what I'm drawn to. And then, of course, figuring out how it might sit within my larger bodies of work or questions that I'm exploring, but just kind of trying to have a little bit of fun right now.
Yeah. I guess for the audience or anyone who's watching afterwards, I've known both Gabrielle and Shefon from their earlier practice days. So just to see them grow in ways that have kind of like not even like the start and stops, but just like the general climb of the practice for both of you all. I guess for you, Gabrielle, just you kind of taking that leap into that, not even like it was more so a leap into an extension of what you're already doing, like exploring it in clay, and seeing someone just, just get in there and not be afraid of the making. I think that the making and the playfulness is where you're going to be most successful, because you're not going to be judging the work in the way that it has to be like presented. And I think that's a great example. So if anybody wants to go like look at her website, Instagram, all of that has come from just play and exploration, and the vessels are beautiful. I guess for you, Shafan, anyone looking at your work prior to, I think the growth from and when we're thinking about like artist statement to work and how that reflects, I think this body of work really is exemplary of the interiority that you're kind of like speaking about, and like what that looks like inside of your work, and being able to create compositions, because I feel like uh, the before work was more kind of abstractions and kind of like just moments, and kind of just points here and there, but these moving into more of like a full composition of a room, or a full composition of what what space and time looked like, uh, or could look like for that particular like rememory. So I think you're right on track for that. And I wish I had visuals for all of these, but to kind of like help people understand it, because I can like talk about it like for days. But for both of you, I think that you're on the right track, and just keep being obsessed about the work that you're doing. And we can always talk offline about the particulars and the spiritualities of it all. Grateful for meeting you both in this time.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing us together for this conversation.
I think, I guess this is the end. I don't know if Kayla's going to come back or not. Otherwise, I don't know how, but yes.